Bryan Harsin era is about to unfold on the field, on the spring practice field, that is, in just about 3 weeks. On the Plains, we got Vernon Speaks Sports to talk Auburn football here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. If you like what we do, not necessarily what comes out of my mouth, but we're bringing you content constantly every day. So even if you don't agree with me, please like the video, share them out on social media, and subscribe right here at the voice of college football. Hey, man, it's good to see you today. What's going on?
Nothing much, man. It's definitely spectacular to be back on the show talking about Auburn football. It's always a funny story when I reflect back on our very first video now 2 years ago. And here we are still doing this thing together. Want to give a big war eagle to all the Auburn fans out there, and definitely glad to be back on the show today. It's always an honor.
Well, the guy that everybody's wanted to talk about the last couple of years has been the quarterback, Bo Nix, but now he's been supplanted by the head coach, because anytime you got a new head coach and people are unfamiliar with him since he's not an SEC guy, the thought is, okay, who is this guy? We see his record. We see what he did at Boise State. Hopefully he's going to be able to upgrade our competition within the SEC and take down big bad Bama. Your thoughts about the Bryan Harsin hire, what he has shown us thus far. And of course, we talked about it a little bit before we started to record. You mentioned recruiting, which definitely ended on a sour note under Gus Malzahn, but we see where Bryan Harsin and his staff have picked it up quite a bit.
You know, Bryan Harsin, I think about the day Gus Malzahn actually got fired. I was shocked. I was actually in the middle of a cat nap. And I woke up to the breaking news that Gus Malzahn had gotten fired. And immediately I thought, well, who is Auburn going to get? You know, Gus Malzahn didn't get blown out his last game. It appeared he did this really goofy dance after the game that really gave the indication that he was still going to be there. But next day he's fired. A couple of weeks, you had a lot of names kind of springing out there, you know, anywhere from Hugh Freeze all the way to some of the other names that were out there. And all of a sudden, you see the breaking news that Auburn has hired Bryan Harsin. Now, most Auburn fans would have to think, well, who the heck is this? Turns out Bryan Harsin has been a very successful coach at Boise State. He's one of the third winningest coaches currently in college football. But one thing about it, you have to think that a good portion of the Auburn fan base were relieved that Gus Malzahn was moving on, but still a little doubt about, you know, what Bryan Harsin could actually bring to the table. Bryan Harsin did his first presser. And when I tell you that first press conference kind of soothed the minds of the Auburn fan base, he talked a lot of good stuff. He talked a lot about development. He talked about a lot about recruiting. He talked about how he was going to piece together the right staff that could move Auburn into the right direction. And I can't say that he wasn't telling the truth, because I think you're doing a pretty good job when you can get Derek Mason, a former head coach, as your defensive coordinator, and Mike Bobo, as, you know, had a lot of success at Georgia, also a head coach himself. So you got a lot of developmental opportunities there. But I think the biggest thing lately, though, that has been different, at least from what the news media outlets put out there, is the fact that Bryan Harsin is kind of doing this inside out version of recruiting. He's actually recruiting very aggressively locally. Matter of fact, he just landed a guy out of Auburn High School. I can't remember the last time Auburn, Auburn University got a guy from Auburn High School that is literally jogging distance away from the school if you're in good shape. So I think the biggest thing that has the Auburn fan base kind of sliding in a direction to where they're pro Bryan Harsin is how aggressively he's recruiting and how he's not appears to be backing down in that regard.
So yeah, the Tigers finished 8th in the SEC in the 2021 class, 20th in the country, and really the numbers for 2022 at this point are inconsequential. They've got 3 hard commits, including the young man that you mentioned from right there down the street, Powell Gordon, offensive outside linebacker, actually 38th rated at his position. Got Vernon Speaks Sports on the line. Join him right here on YouTube, breaking down the Tigers. Just Vernon Speaks Sports. You see it right on the banner. Just lock it in right there in the search title, and you will find his YouTube channel, Talking Auburn. All right. Defensively, the secondary needs some work. There needs to be an upgrade there. They've gone to the transfer portal to the Big 12 to get some help.
Yes, sir. And I wouldn't say the secondary necessarily needs some help, but I think from an experience standpoint, they did a good deal in getting Drayshawn out of West Virginia, who had some pretty good experience. He had some good reps at West Virginia, and then what I really like about him is the fact that in the Big 12, you're going to get tested a lot in the pass game. They tend to pass a little bit more in that conference, so he definitely has some reps as far as that goes. And what I'm predicting is that Roger McCreary, who has been a mainstay at the cornerback position, made some big plays even last year. I think he's going to hold down the field cornerback position, which tends to be the cornerback that has the most responsibility space-wise. It seems like Drayshawn is going to probably challenge Jalen Simpson and a couple of the other guys for. It's going to be a serious challenge for that boundary cornerback position that Drayshawn might actually win.
Ferdinand Speaks Sports, talking up Auburn. Check him out on his YouTube channel as Auburn gets to a spring practice here in a few weeks. All right, let's look at the offensive side of the ball. You wanted to talk quarterback, which I'm thinking it's Bo Nix's job, and who's going to wrestle it away from him. Your thoughts about Bo Nix, and is there a quarterback competition, or is it just all about improving Bo Nix?
I think it's a combination of both. I think you're going to have a legit quarterback position. Quarterback competition. I also think this is a developmental opportunity for Bo Nix, who had a strange amount of what quote unquote bad habits. And a lot of those bad habits trace back to high school. And the strange thing about it is the fact that Bo Nix actually was successful with some of these bad habits, with some of the what would transfer over as poor mechanics in Power 5 football. He tends to flush the pocket, before he needs to, just for a lack of a better way of putting it. He doesn't like to set his feet when he throws at times. He was actually successful doing that kind of stuff in high school, but of course, in Power 5, that doesn't usually work. I think he's going to have some serious challenges from Demartrius Davis, who in some media outlets in the state of Texas, North Shore High School, close to Houston, arguably the best quarterback coming out. Well, he was actually the quarterback of the offensive player of the year, I think, over in Texas this year. Had a great amount of success, very successful as far as wins and losses out there in Texas. And and I'm pretty sure with that type of success has to come with a successful mentality. Has to come with the guy who says, look, I'm not coming all the way from Texas when I could have gone to Texas A&M, when I could have gone right up the street to Houston. I could have even gone to the FCS route and went to Texas Southern in Houston. I'm coming all the way to Auburn in the heart of SEC country, and I want to make a statement come as one of the best quarterbacks out of Texas my senior year. I'm not coming here just to sit on the bench.
All right, we got Vernon Speaks Sports on the line to talk Auburn. Yeah, Bo Nix coming off a season which he completed 60% of his passes, which in this day and age isn't necessarily the best. You had Mac Jones at 77%. Now, that's obviously the high end. That was like the best figure in the history of college football, but right. 65% seems to be about where these guys are throwing at this point. 12 touchdowns, 7 picks. Again, not the best ratio there, but he also adds the running element to it. When we look at his threats downfield, who do we pick up? Who do we lose at wide receiver?
Arguably, I mean, you can't discount the loss of Seth Williams, who, definitely a clutch wide receiver, good for the deep throws, good for a game-winning back shoulder throw. Sometimes he had his flaws as well, but overall, it's just hard to replace that production readily. And then you talk about the prospect of, Anthony Schwartz. When he gets his hands on the football, some things can happen. He's one of the fastest, or was one of the fastest college football players in the country. You have to replace that talent with, guys like Kobe Hudson, right down the road from Troup County High School in LaGrange, Georgia. He's going to be a guy that they're going to depend on. Xavion Capers is a guy that they're going to have to look upon. Shedrick Jackson. And I think when we talk about going into spring football for Auburn, one of the biggest questions, one of the biggest thumbnails of the spring is who's going to be that next breakout receiver. And then if you look at it historically, Auburn has just never had that receiver that just scared the crap out of you. Like, say, for instance, the receiver from Devontae Smith from Alabama. He scared the crap out of you. You had to account for him. That is on your bulletin board as a defensive coordinator. How are we going to stop him? I don't think many Auburn fans can name a guy. Now, we've had some good ones, but we just haven't had a guy that just really kept defenses off balance. And I think that's something that Auburn is going to want to look at moving forward. Because if you think about all of the teams that have won national championships in the last few years, they've had elitism at wide receiver.
No question about that. It's become a passing game, and you need those guys that can change the game, not just move the sticks, but get the chunk plays that you need in this day and age. The offensive line has been a sore spot of concern for a few years now. And based on this 2021 class, there's not going to be a whole lot of help coming at this point.
Well, Auburn is doing, not to sugarcoat this, Auburn is in a tough spot when it comes to offensive line, especially coming into the season. And if you take away the concerns at offensive line, then I could get on here and say, hey, man, you might really need to look out for Auburn this year. But when you have a situation where the offensive tackle, the left tackle opposite Bo Nix, is just a position that Auburn has not been able to fill consistently at a high level. If Auburn can't find a reliable left tackle to protect either Bo Nix, Demarcus Davis, or whoever is the quarterback's back shoulder, and that quarterback has trust in that position, then you're going to be in pretty bad shape. Also, just missed blocks. A lot of developmental things that you expect out of an offensive line, Auburn just has not been able to execute that here in the last couple of years. Now, I will say, when you're dealing with an offensive line, a anemic offensive line, not having a spring practice really hurts, because you don't get that physical sample size. You don't get to put those guys in adverse positions, and you have to utilize the actual game day to figure out who's going to be the best guy from a physicality standpoint. Auburn was actually moving in the right direction, but then you get last season, but then you get an injury to Brandon Council. Then other guys started to become injured, and now you just have a skeleton crew rolling into the rest of the season, and it just didn't work out. But here's some good news. Auburn actually they haven't done a excellent job as far as rating recruiting wise, but they have a hell of a sample size of guys that they can put in positions to where they could possibly put a good combination, at least a manageable combination in place with manageable backups to make their offensive line. Even if Auburn can be respectable at the offensive line position, I think that puts them in a position to not necessarily win a SEC West championship or win the national champ, but it puts them in a decent place to be competitive against the teams that they need to be competitive against. We'll talk about that in a second.
Well, anytime we point out a recruiting ranking for a particular player, that player could be the 100th rated player at his position. He could turn out to be a superstar. The recruiting rankings mean a whole lot when you talk about in droves, in volume.
Right.
But for any particular player, we see it all the time. 5 stars become busts, and 2 stars become tremendous players. But again, more than likely, your best players are going to come from those 4 and 5 star ranks.
Yep.
The only 2 guys that they signed in the 2021 class up front are Garner Langlow. He's the 34th rated guard in the country. They also signed Colby Smith, who's the 50th rated offensive tackle in the country. So again, not necessarily guys that, based on the recruiting rankings, you would expect to become all SEC kind of performers, but we'll just have to wait to see them on campus, and only one's going to break in spring ball as well. Got Vernon Speaks Sports on the line from YouTube. Catch his channel right there, talking Auburn. So you mentioned expectations. We're not going to pin you down for any kind of prediction. We've got a long time to talk about that, and got to get through spring ball for sure. But you kind of led the way on the
Right.
expectation
You know,
topic.
when we talk expectation with Auburn, I just look at the schedule. For example, Auburn has a very manageable situation schedule wise that can really get the typical Auburn fan base pretty fired up early. Okay, so you got a situation where you got Akron coming to town. You should beat them. Alabama State, a regular on Auburn's schedule, FCS school from right down the road in Montgomery, Alabama. But I mentioned this on my channel, and it reminded me of Georgia in 2017 when Georgia played a couple of cupcakes, but then you circle that schedule with Notre Dame on the road. This situation that Auburn has going up to Penn State on the road, you can't say that this is not going to be a national stage type football game. It's probably going to be televised on ABC, and this is a very good opportunity for Bryan Harsin and his staff. I don't think anyone will say that this is a must-win game for Auburn, but damn, if you could get it, how the perception of the program, which these are program perception changing games, just like we thought differently of Kirby Smart, even with the one point win in South Bend. All the fan base at Georgia needed to know, hey, we beat Notre Dame, and we beat Notre Dame on the road. That set the stage to an improbable trip to the national championship game for Georgia, where they actually lost in overtime to Alabama. I think they should have won that game, but who cares what I think? But at the same time, if Auburn can win that game, I think that's gonna really set the tone trajectory wise of the 2021 season for the Tigers.
Okay. Based on how I view the two teams right now, I would consider it to be basically a toss-up to a certain extent, although Penn State's at home, I'll give them a slight edge. But Penn State's a team that's been winning between 9 and 11 games for the last 4 to 5 years and finishing in the top 10 generally, but they're coming off a bad year, although we know what happened with the pandemic and a limited schedule, and they won their last 4 games after losing the first 5. Auburn, of course, is going to have 2 games under their belts. That's going to be a pretty good warm-up to be able to figure out where they are without being challenged against Akron and Alabama State.
For sure. I mean, I just think that there's no, really no better way that you can, have a soft landing into a season, especially with a brand new head coach with a lot of questions involved. You basically get to stretch your fall camp out a couple of more weeks to figure some things out in a in-game situation to where you can rotate some things around to see what works best. So I think Auburn is will be in a very positive position going into the Penn State game, having those 2 games under their belt to be able to see where their success tendencies will be going into that game. And after Penn State, of course, you have your typical SEC gauntlet with your Arkansas, who is now good, Ole Miss, will be a better team. We don't know what to expect from Mississippi State, but it's going to be a tough stretch. So I think if Auburn can take advantage of that early opportunity to get some momentum, to get some confidence, because it's something crazy about winning. I played football myself, and it's something crazy about winning. You don't have to be the most talented team, but winning does something to you internally to where you start to really believe that you can beat anybody. And a win over Penn State and channel that going into the season. I think they got an early game with Georgia now that the schedule is switched. I mean, that could really, really get some wheels turning for Auburn with a nice win over Penn State.
Yeah, they should arrive at LSU at 4-0 if they win in Happy Valley, and then they've got LSU and Georgia back-to-back. That's the toughest back-to-back of the season by far. Ole Miss, Texas A&M back-to-back as well, and of course the Iron Bowl at the end.
Right.
The out-of-division game, South Carolina, and of course it's always Georgia. All right, Vernon Speaks Sports. Catch him on YouTube talking up the Auburn Tigers. Appreciate you stopping by, man.
Oh, yeah, man. Always enjoyed. And for the Auburn fans out there, War Eagle.